All right. Hello, everyone. Today, this is our undergraduate panel. Thank you all for coming. We have one of our wonderful undergrads who is also the president of our CLARE Undergraduate Society Agora, Noah Spivak, who will be moderating this panel today. Just as a quick reminder, if you wish to have any questions for our undergraduate presenters today, you have the option to either type up your question into our Q&A box, which Noah will then read out to each presenter, or you can raise your hand, and when Noah says your name, you can go ahead and speak and ask your question in person live. We'll also be recording this session. So if you do ask a question, just know that that will also be recorded as well. So thank you again, everyone, for showing up, and I will hand it over to Noah to moderate.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Sydney. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today at the first undergraduate panel for the annual Classics and Religious Studies Graduate Conference. This panel has been created by the collaboration of Agora, the CLARE Undergraduate Society, and the CLARE Departmental Graduate Association. My name is Noah Spivak, and I am the president of Agora, and I am over the moon to bring this panel to fruition and exhibit the talents of the CLARE undergraduates. Before we get going, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Pekainai, and Kainai nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I would also like to note the University of Calgary is situated on land adjacent to where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and that the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Mohkinstsis, which we now call the city of Calgary. This panel is themed very simply, chaos. After a strange year where we were constantly thrown into new unknowns, it felt fitting we should talk about the effect of chaos through religion, classics, and ancient and medieval history. Before I introduce our first presenter, I'd like to thank the DGA and the Conference Planning Committee for working closely with us in developing this panel and inviting us to be part of the conference. We are so privileged to have incredible mentors and role models right here at home. I'd also like to thank the undergraduates who are brave enough to submit and present at what is, for some of them, their first conference. I am so excited to be able to enjoy your hard work and exciting research. First up, we have Gillian Darichuk. Gillian is an ancient and medieval studies undergraduate student with an interest in pagan narratives surviving Christian influence, cultural biases in historical translations, and the political significance of ancient historical record keepers. Her presentation focuses on Celtic philosophy of death and afterlife. Now I will pass it off to Gillian.
Thank you, Noah. I'm just going to share a little presentation I made. So I do have some points on the Celtic philosophy and their point of view on death and the afterlife, mostly based on what is surviving in the modern day. So because of Christian influence, and that being the first time that a lot of Celtic philosophy and mythology was written down for the historical record that we can see today, we do have to look through the Christian narrative that turned gods and goddesses into saints and focused on other factors that came from more mainland Europe than the Isles in their kind of isolated area. While they did have some pretty strong connections to Gaulish philosophy as well, and trade routes that did carry a great amount of mythology, because they are insulated islands, they do have their own growth that does separate them from mainland Europe. So specifically, Celtic Catholicism came and grew out of Celtic philosophy with Christian kind of overview. It's through this philosophy and subsect of the Christian belief that we can compare and find the pagan roots of these amazing people. A lot of the traditions that we still see in Celtic Catholic death practices do have pagan and Celtic roots. The idea of circular energy is the most prominent. So while there's massive even if there is different metals in a ring or different points on the ring, they are all smooth and constant and together. So each point on a ring is a different experience a person's soul can go through. So there might be a point on the ring that is someone's life, and after the ring, there is death, and it circles back to before. So the idea of a soul going to the same place that they came from before birth is the basis for their philosophy, and so many other Indo-European philosophies throughout the world. While it is a circular ring, it is not quite the same as reincarnation. There is a certain amount of self and person that does not disappear, no matter how many times you go around the ring. So it's not an immediate, you go from one being to another and it's different versions of a soul or different parts of a soul, like you would see in some Hindu practices, for example. But circular energy is the basis for their metaphysical theory. The idea of your soul being a ring that can link with others is the phrase anamkara, which is soul friend. So while you can be linked to someone else, and they can be your soul friend, the person that knows your soul and your energy from start to end, all the little messy bits, all the clean, shiny bits, all of it, that doesn't mean that you are their soul friend, and it can create a interlocking chain, almost like chainmail. And the interlocking rings create a community, create family of one anamkara after the other. So while you can have your soul friend and your life, your death follows you throughout the entire life, according to a lot of these sources that we look at. In particular, John O'Donoghue, who has so many sources and was a great help to me on this paper. So while death, in his words, is an ever-present shadow that attached itself to you at birth, you have to have a death to be alive, is their kind of base philosophy. Your death is constant. It will come at some point. So why not embrace it like a friend? That is the kind of thing that you would open up and share with your soul friend, the nitty-gritty details of this death that you carry around with you throughout your entire life. It is acknowledged that it is completely normal to fear it, but it is not, it's not productive in their kind of way of thinking. It is something that needs to be worked through during your life so that you do not fear it. You accept your death, and through that pattern and that growth of confronting your fear and accepting it, you are able to live a full and complete and happy life. Much like their afterlife, it is merely a new experience that you do not have through your physical body, but you still have your soul. That's why they have the idea of your ancestors can still be living around you, or that you need to keep certain ruins there instead of rebuilding things. You can add on, but you can't get rid of foundations that don't get destroyed naturally, because ancestors and people who have died were so used to those things that if you take it away, how are they going to continue in their habits that they had in life? Even if you cannot see them on a physical level, because they no longer have a body to interact with you, doesn't mean they are not there. The idea is space is the same on many levels of perception, and time continues on, no matter how circular it gets. So much like chaos, there's also a huge link to infinity. So you as a person have infinite possibilities. A person can become anything to the community, can become and be support systems, anamkara, and can take different actions in life. But with each action you choose, you are then denying or killing the other possibilities that were open to you before you made your decision. So if you are killing versions of yourself by making a choice of who you want to be, then those are versions of you that die and kind of are the energy of your shadow, of your death. And that is the parts and versions of you that follow you through your life. It has this really strong connection to a multiverse theory, which was heavily considered, especially in kind of the Druid philosophy. These record keepers and historians and physicians, mostly called Druids, as they did have a word for Druid, thought of the world and how big the world was, how big the universe was, how the stars moved, and thought of it as different layers. The earth had different layers that could be perceived by the human body and could not, as well as the heavens having different versions. And each version that you are not living is something that could have been lived, but is not. It is dead to the reality in front of you. And therefore it is a part of your kind of death shadow following you around. You can be incredibly happy and content and do good things with the version that you are now, but you also have to look back and at all the versions you could be in your death shadow and not fear it, to be a productive and healthy member of society. So your soul and your identity is very closely intertwined, basically the same thing to, honestly, a lot of cultures. It's where a lot of the Christian debates came from, and Jewish debates before that. The Celtic philosophy is your soul is who you are, and your body is merely the home that you are living in while on this earth, on the physical plane. And so even your body can then have a larger home where you hang your hat at the end of the day. And then your home is in your hometown, and then you have your home country. It's just kind of nesting Rashomon of home, your body being the first and kind of the most important. It is the one that interacts with the world so that you can have this experience before moving on and having a new experience in the afterlife. The senses are incredibly important to these philosophers, and they are almost sacred because the absence of sensations or your senses is what is as close as you can get to what your soul will experience before birth or after death. So it is in those places where you can confront your fear on death and live a holy life, because their philosophy is so tied in with their religious practices, like so many are. The ascetic life is very much a quiet and reflective one, like most other cultures, but it does not deny the joy of senses and the importance of it, to see another human, to speak, to touch, to communicate your experience as a human before passing on to feel new experiences in the afterlife, is one of the most important parts of their philosophy and their culture, because they did not have written records before Christianity came and started recording for them. So the sense of story and narrative is something that is heavily taught and heavily encouraged, while still being incredibly human. So one's kind of identity is the actions you take on the world. But the body can be unbalanced because the soul is eternal. The body changes and flows and moves through life whether you want to or not. Your soul can be holding on to control and not facing the movements of life and wanting to control the chaos around them so much that it harms them more than helps. Which is why when you die, your body is not you anymore. The phrase that is most common, and we can see repeated quite a few times, meant to bring comfort, and is even said to this day at funerals. I'm not going to say it in Gaelic because I'll probably have a terrible accent, but let you not be crying, because there's nothing of him down there, only the covering that was on him in life. And covering, much like we would refer to clothing, we can change, we can adapt, we can transform, but it does not change who we are unless we let it. So the body, while being a home and while being the ability to interact with the physical world, it does limit the soul and contain it until the afterlife is then entered. Because the body is the thing in which you experience, it is kind of seen as the bookends of your life. Your birth and your death are on equal footing. You have to return to where you once came. And the burial can be referred to as a reverse cesarean section, because the earth is cut open very particularly so that it can be covered so that it can be covered as if it was never cut. Because a body without a soul is an abandoned home, it can be taken over and used by something that is not you, which is where they get the idea of ghouls and ghosts and hauntings. Because that is not their home, it doesn't fit right, and it can be malicious or malignant. Which is why they are kind of sealed and stuck in the dark of the earth with no light of life, no growth beyond that. It's kind of you contain someone's body and put it back to the earth, to the ultimate womb of the mother, because the earth does the same thing to old homes. ivy grows over it and it crumbles as the earth takes it back. A lot of ruins are still respected, but they let the earth cover them up. And they even did this back in the Bronze Age. The cutting is very important because the sod holds the hills together. So to make it almost as if there wasn't a burial site is incredibly important to them. And it does very much reinforce the fact that the person you are mourning is no longer in that body. You do not need to focus on the body so much as the person and the soul that is still out there. While you can respect someone's home that they are no longer in, it no longer holds the warmth and love of that person, and you cannot give and receive love and warmth if there is no soul there to receive or give back. Death is seen just the same as a birth. So, like I said, bookends on either side, they are the same. They are the same design usually. They are a continuation of one another. You are being born into the afterlife, and it is celebrated much the same. Wet earth is very much important, especially since the womb is considered water, and it's a very feminine and powerful and goddess like power. So while they do put dead bodies into the ground, into the womb of the earth mother, water and the cleansing of a body before so is also incredibly important, and washing throughout your life is incredibly important. That holds a great deal of reverence and kind of holiness. It is like the rivers. You can swim along in it throughout your life and in your afterlife, or you can fight against it and try and hold on to your life before you die, and you will still be pulled away by the current. You have to address your fear of water, for example, or your fear of death, or your fear of this shadow that is constantly with you. Otherwise, you will have a harmful death. You will not go peacefully. It will be hard. And the idea of your life is to make it so that you can pass into this new version of experience peacefully and happily, knowing what you need to know from this point in your soul's journey. Thank you so much. I got most of my stuff from Anamkara, Book of Celtic Wisdom, which is absolutely amazing, and I can't thank you guys enough.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation, Gillian. That was amazing, and I'm so excited I got to learn about that. That's so out of my field. That's awesome. We will now be fielding some questions for our 10-minute Q&A period. If you are comfortable with appearing on video, please raise your hand and I will get to you in the chat. And if you'd rather I just read your question out, please submit them in the Q&A section. I already see a hand is raised. I see Kelly has a question. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Thank you so much for that presentation. I've heard of John O'Donohue, and I hear he's amazing, so I will definitely check out that book. I'm curious, I know you spoke a little bit about burial rituals and sort of the practice of the Celtic wisdom and philosophy, but I'm curious if there are other sort of daily or kind of, yeah, rituals that would unite a community and sort of bring people together on an ongoing basis.
So I'm not as familiar on their daily practices, but I do know that a community comes together to mourn someone. There were there's not the best sources on some of their daily practices, at least that I could find. But what I did read a little bit about was their connection with the Fae. There were some people who were considered friends of the fairies, and they would be able to hear fairies' laughter or these different things. And when those people died, the entire community knew because they could hear the Fae mourning them. And that was the only time people who couldn't hear the Fae regularly could hear it. So I do think that there was some reverence to those special people in communities that were connected to daily, but I don't know much about daily practices beyond that.
That's great. Thank you so much.
All right, I have a question in the chat from you. This one's from Sydney. Sydney asks, can you explain how this idea of soul and multiverse helps create a stronger connection to the ancestors? And do you think that this creates a stronger familial connection in this culture / society today?
I absolutely do. A deep family connection is something that you can still see in these Celtic-based societies today. And it is a lot like ancestor worship, especially since what we can tell of their stories, mythology happened to their ancestors, much like a Roman emperor would claim that they were the grandson, great-grandson, or whatever of Zeus or Apollo or whatever. These figures in mythology were the ancestors of these Celtic people. From what I gather from my sources is that it's kind of like paper, and how you can like wrap paper around like a ring, and you can have multiple leaves of paper all wrapped together, but just because you can see the top one and maybe it's really thin and you can see like the top 3 pages doesn't mean you can see 4 or 5 or 6 pages deep. So it acts like versions of things, like versions of the senses. You can see things, you can touch things, you can smell things, you can hear things. But there are things in this world like souls that you do not have the ability to see within within the senses of the human body. So there is versions of you and versions of who you could become that exist. So you can't see them because you do not have the organs to perceive them, to smell them, to touch them. This connection with the ancestors, and it's like you can't kind of scientifically prove that they are there, is kind of the source of uneasiness and shakiness that doesn't translate well once Christianity kind of took over. But I do think it is heavily connected to ancestor worship and really held people together.
All right, we have our next question from Carolyn. Carolyn says, thank you, Gillian, for your presentation. How do we know about pre-Christian death rituals and belief in Ireland? Is it mainly today's not my day, archaeological or textual evidence surviving?
I took a particular focus on the textual evidence, but there are archaeological sites and burial mounds that have been taken apart, and we are going through that. Absolutely beautiful artwork that does tell the stories of other deaths that we can see replicated in these graves. But most of this is from what I was basing my research on was the written records of Christian monks and priests that were observing the traditions around them change as more people converted to Christianity and created their own form of Christianity, which we can now see in Celtic Catholicism.
All right, I have a question from Cassie. Thank you for the incredible talk, Gillian. I'm curious if different genders had varying connections with the afterlife and the idea of an infinite life cycle due to varying life experiences. As well, if your body was just a host or home for your soul, was reincarnation a common idea?
So while you could be a part of someone else, you were never quite a complete reincarnation. There will always be versions of your soul, especially the one that passes into the afterlife, that is a thing. There can be parts of you that kind of peel off and affect other things. But from what I can see, reincarnation isn't as you go from one life to the next like you would take a step in a walk. But yeah, reincarnation was kind of similar, but not quite the same as you would think, or we are very familiar with based on other kind of mythologies that do use reincarnation. Everyone has their own spin on it, I guess.
All right, we have time for one more question before I turn it over to the next presentation. This one also comes from Sydney. Some versions of monasticism have strong ideas of a brotherhood. Two monks may be joined in brotherhood/friendship bonds similar to medieval notions of marriage. Do you know if this is true for Christian monastics in this area? And if it is, do you think this could be related to the idea of soul friend?
From what I've been able to read and gather, it is incredibly similar. From the point at which kind of Celtic Catholicism creates its own bubble, we can see the idea of the town priest is supposed to be everyone's soul friend. It's supposed to be the person that you are going to share absolutely everything with. Just like you would go to confession and expose anything and everything about you that you feel is like a sin, you would do that with a soul friend as well. So I'm not sure if the idea of Anamkara and soul friend is reinforced by the Christian monasticism that came in, or if it went the other way and the idea of soul friends kind of influenced Christianity back. Because they're so similar and it was kind of an assimilation, it's really hard to tell from what I was able to gather.
Thank you so much for your answers. This was an amazing presentation and you answered everything beautifully. And now I am going to introduce our next presenter. So next, lost my notes there. We have Lulu Petrosyan. So Lulu Petrosyan is a fourth-year BA major in archaeology with a minor in Greek and Roman studies. Her areas of interest revolve around early state development and interaction in the Near East, Armenian history, and conservation of Near Eastern heritage sites. Lulu is currently serving as student director for the Archaeological Society of Alberta Calgary Centre, VP academic of Agora, as well as student representative for the Canadian Archaeological Association. She hopes to complete a master's in Near Eastern archaeology and support excavations and preservation projects in Armenia. Her presentation is entitled Hatshepsut, the Power of Legacy in Ancient Egypt. And now I will turn it over to Lulu.
Thank you, Noah. I just need to figure out how to share my screen here. All right, so my presentation is on Hatshepsut. So let's begin. Let's start with a delicate balance. The term pharaoh was not adopted until the The term pharaoh was not adopted until the New Kingdom, from a word meaning the great house or palace. The individuals who held this role not only commanded a divine right to rule, but were also believed to be an incarnation of the god Horus himself on earth. Thus, the most significant concept when it came to the role of the pharaoh or king in ancient Egypt was that of Mat. Although the king was accepted as the embodiment of a god, this had to be proven through his actions. Meaning, if a king was not successful or the expectations placed on him to keep Mat were not met, they would be accused of being an imposter to the throne. All of the king's decisions were therefore made with the ideals of balance and order placed before anything else. The next group of import within the royal house is the god's wife of Amun. This position is attested to the beginning of the 18th dynasty as well. The god's wife was the wife or daughter of the pharaoh and performed a number of cultic roles, such as participation in the processions of Amun, shared responsibilities with the high priest, and they had an actual position as the metaphorical wife of the god. This is the role Hatshepsut would have held as the principal wife of King Thutmose II. So looking at this family tree, which I had to draw because it is a little bit confusing, there was a lot of intermarriage between the pharaohs and their siblings, and they had more than one wife. The principal wife I've highlighted with a crown. So Hatshepsut's father was Thutmose I, and his principal wife was her mother Ahmose. But Ahmose didn't have any surviving sons when Thutmose passed away. So the next in line had to be a male. So it came from one of his other wives, Nofret, and it was Thutmose II. Hatshepsut and Thutmose II were married. He was her brother, and he died at a young age as well, before he and Hatshepsut were able to have any sons. So her only child was Neferure, and she was a girl, so she obviously couldn't take the throne. So when Thutmose II died, his son from another secondary wife, Thutmose III, took the throne. So Hatshepsut was his stepmother, but also his aunt. So here I have Hatshepsut's Guide to Taking Power. And we're going to go through step by step how she did it. Step one was to coronate your stepson and become queen regent. Step two is wait 2 to 7 years, carefully orchestrate taking complete control slowly. Step three, be really good at your job so no one wants to overthrow you. And step four, die a legend. So step one, a regent was responsible for running government duties that would normally be handled by the king, in place of a son who was too young to govern. In this case, Hatshepsut takes the position as the chief queen and god's wife of Amun. At the beginning of her rule, we still see depictions of Hatshepsut with a female figure and way of dress. Images where she is secondary to young Thutmose, who is technically the true king and holds the spirit of Amun. So here we see an image of Hatshepsut in the royal regalia of a queen, next to Sennemut, who was the architect during this time. Step two, successfully exercising girl power. So in this shift to power, there is a shift to the balance of powers that occurs about 2 to 7 years into her regency. This change also means that although Thutmose is shown to be coronated when he is young, with Hatshepsut present, he does not take the throne from her when he comes of age, but waits for her to die before he has the full influence of a pharaoh. Many scholars in the past have argued that she was a power-hungry villain who unjustly usurped Thutmose's rightful throne. In one article I read, they described them as gentlemen scholars of a certain generation, which reads as sexist. Some modern interpretations have added more nuance to this. Her actions can be seen as a progression in her political opportunities, full of complexity, not just a conniving snatching of a title that did not belong to her. Robbins presents the perspective that perhaps she had intended to hand over the throne when the time came, but as she grew used to her political position, she found it hard to give up that power, thus finding a way to keep it. It's understandable why Hatshepsut would begin framing herself and her depictions with symbols representing male kingship. This presentation of herself has led many to ask questions about her gender identity and gender expression. In truth, the interpretation that she either wanted to be seen as a man, tried to trick people into believing that she was one, or, sorry, I lost my spot. Or that she hid the fact that she was a woman has no basis in evidence. As argued by Maddock, this is directly contradicted by the very fact that even when depicted as a male, Hatshepsut still kept her names in female gender. We know that she never tried to fool anyone, but when we look at other evidence of changes she made to her image outside of the physical, it becomes more clear what her motivations may have been. She claimed that she was the heir that was appointed by her father, Thutmose II, before his death. Finally, she erects depictions of her divine birth in her temple at Deir el-Bahri, where she is seen shown as the daughter of the god Amun and her mortal mother Ahmozi. She also took the kingly name Matkare, meaning the proper manifestation of the sun's life force. An image at Karnak shows her undertaking the divine rite in female dress. She is identified with this name in her cartouche, along with the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt. Through this image, she creates the propagandic idea of her right to rule, one that legitimizes her as the daughter of a god. The spread of this mythos would make her reign more acceptable for the Egyptian people, and it makes it more difficult to dispute her position as the pharaoh. It should be noted that although Thutmose III's depictions are not absent from her temple, he is certainly overshadowed by Hatshepsut. She presents herself more prominently in areas that are considered more sacred, is often depicted as the larger figure in images they share together. How do you reconcile two rulers with the idea of a kingly divinity, though? Winterman explains that this phenomenon thus: there was not a single Ka spirit that moved back and forth between multiple kings, nor did it germinate. Each king shared the royal Ka and possessed a unique royal Ka, but both can be viewed alternatively as a single Ka spirit. The representations of the two kings are described as a mirror of one another by Davies, and an important expression of the idea of duality in ancient Egypt. He argues that Hatshepsut did not actually depict Thutmose III as an inferior to her, but used his position as king to legitimize her own. Additionally, by calling herself king, Hatshepsut could undermine the belief that the pharaoh is the representation of the god Horus as the living son of the pharaoh, and the god Osiris as a form of the dead king's take in the afterlife. So this is another example of the cultural obstacles Hatshepsut would face that may explain her purpose in presenting herself in the attire of a man, perhaps to fit this idea of a male god king that she is meant to embody. Step 3, she's really good. She begins a new age of construction following little evidence of monumental construction during the Second Intermediate and early 18th dynasty. She commissions projects all over the kingdom, including in Nubia. However, her greatest work was in Thebes, the capital at the time. She built the processional road leading to the Temple of Karnak and other temples along the way. The most significant and grand of her buildings is her own mortuary temple, now at a site called Deir el-Bahri. The temple served as her final resting place, but was also a site of the shrine of Amun and 5 other cults of major gods. This temple was certainly a symbol of her power and a form of propaganda. Through this temple, Laborie argues that Hatshepsut plainly emphasized her very close personal and traditional royal relationship with the god of kinship, Amun. After her death, this temple is the gateway for her access to the underworld, as well as the main evidence and image she wishes to present about herself and her reign for future generations. 2 other career highlights I want to mention is her beginning to trade with Punt after centuries of not trading with them. Punt is a very prosperous kingdom that we aren't really sure where it is now, but it's somewhere along the Red Sea south of Egypt, and she was able to get a lot of exotic goods from them, which contributed to Egypt's economic prosperity. And also she appointed Thutmose III as general of the Egyptian army, and he did a lot of conquering he was really good at it, and he never tried to overthrow her. So step 4, which should have been die a legend, but unfortunately there's a hitch in her master plan. There's a clear and calculated attempt of destruction at her temple after her burial, but there's lots of argument about why it happened. Robbins presents the view that the rare events of a woman was alien to the Egyptian concept of kingship, and when Hatshepsut became king, her successor did his best to obliterate her presumption from the monuments, so her successor being Thutmose III. Although there is a large consensus that Thutmose III himself was likely the one to carry out the obliteration, the matter of his disgust and hate towards her for supposedly taking his throne can be easily argued against. If this were true, then it would be strange that Thutmose took no action against her after he had come of age. He is known to be a great commander and strategist, leading many extremely successful campaigns and becoming known as one of the greatest conquerors in world history. Taking this into account, it must be concluded that Thutmose sat by and allowed Hatshepsut to rule. This is perhaps connected to her great skill as a leader and his lack of desire to face her in a clash of kings. This leads to the conclusion that the act was not fueled by anger, but by anxiety and a preventative political action. This is also important to note that this destruction occurred well after Hatshepsut's death. It is believed around year 45 of Thutmose III's reign and took place in stages. Many of her images are altered to look as if she is her father, Thutmose I. However, most statues from her temple were torn down and thrown into quarries. When considering the importance of legacy and legitimacy in keeping the unstable dynasty in power, it seems a plausible reason to carry out such a campaign. Remembering that it was earlier mentioned that Hatshepsut herself was the daughter of the primary wife of Thutmose I, while Thutmose III was the son of a minor wife and a pharaoh who was also the son of a minor wife. This gives a possible motive for his actions. Perhaps he or other members of his family carried this out in order to prevent any contention over their right to rule. Just as Hatshepsut acts to legitimize herself as king, whoever did this to erase her from history wanted to erase not only her identity, but more importantly, in the Egyptian context, her legacy and her legitimacy as a ruler. And that's the end of my presentation. Stop share.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was awesome. I love a good GIF mixed into there, and I even texted you during it that I really liked it, so that was amazing. We're now going to move on to questions. Once again, if you're comfortable with your voice being heard and recorded, you can raise your hand. If not, you can submit questions through the Q&A box, and we will go ahead. All right, I have a question from Sydney. Do you think that gender in this period is defined differently than how scholars attempt to define gender today when studying this period? Do you think then that her depiction as a masculine may then be viewed as a normal gender spectrum performance for a powerful woman rather than as a man?
Yeah, I wanted to mention this, but I think that within gender studies and trying to figure out how gender has been perceived through ages, we try to put our own perspective of gender, which is obviously a social construct, onto people of the past. So it's very difficult to understand what the Egyptian view of gender might have been and how flexible it would have been for them. But I also think it's interesting that there is this idea of balance and kind of a very structured way to live within the Egyptian world. And she kind of draws the line between the masculine and still has her like feminine title. So I think although it was a lot more fluid than we might understand it to be today, it is still interesting why she might have decided to depict herself in such a way.
All right, I have a question from Cassie here for you. Over the period of Hatshepsut's life, do artistic depictions of her change as she progresses through different phases of her life, Oh, I'm going to reread that because I didn't emphasize the words properly. Over the period of Hatshepsut's life, do artistic depictions of her change as she progresses through different phases of her life? If so, were these changes reflective of society's opinion of her?
Yeah, there's a lot of change in the way Hatshepsut is depicted over time, especially as she gets older. She's always depicted as like a young woman, even when she's old, which is common in most depictions of Regency. But especially in her transition towards gaining more power, she slowly starts to have more male elements in her art. And she also, there's an image of her as a sphinx with the kingly regalia on. So there is a clear transition where she starts to gain more male regalia. And that is that contributes to the theory that her taking of power was gradual and not her deliberately making a move, and not like a hard line when she became pharaoh. I hope that answers that question.
I have another question for you from Sydney. So, what does the way in which Hatshepsut takes power say about how women could manipulate their station in life to take agency in this period? Are there other examples of women manipulating social norms to agency in this period that you know of?
I don't know any other example of women altering social norms, but I think it's interesting that Hatshepsut was the first to do this because her position as the daughter of a principal wife, and then the principal wife herself, I think is what actually allowed her to take power in this way. The only other powerful position during this time would be if you're the mother of a pharaoh, but it's not the same as being the actual child of a pharaoh and a principal wife. So I think her position was perfectly set up to take power. I don't think she would be able to do it if she weren't, if she had had a son who was also, I guess, the son of a principal wife then, or if Thutmose wasn't so young. Like, everything in her life worked out in such a way that this was possible for her, and she obviously had a lot of ambition and was successful in what she did. And if she wasn't a successful pharaoh, she also wouldn't have been able to keep power.
All right, thank you so much. That concludes our question period for your presentation. I want to thank you so much for crushing your questions and crushing your presentation and just being here today. All right, I'm going to introduce our next presenter so we can turn things over. So next up, we have Mohamed Tlili. Mohamed is a second-year undergraduate student at the University of Calgary. He is currently pursuing a combined bachelor's degree in mathematics and ancient medieval history. In terms of research focus, Mohamed's interests are broad, but mainly focuses on early medieval traditions of Christianity and monasticism, focusing on interpretations of hagiographies and relevance as a historical source. Mohamed wishes to pursue a master's degree and a PhD in mathematics sometime in the future, but hopes to maintain his passion in the field of ancient and medieval Christianity. And I'm going to turn it over to Mohamed.
Thanks, Noah. So let me just share my PowerPoint. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, we're all good.
Awesome. So, holy relics and the cult of saints in medieval Europe. I picked this topic because it is very fascinating, and it holds a special place in my heart because I really enjoy talking about medieval Christianity. So, when we think of relics, we think of artifacts that have a specific artistic and cultural value we give it. They can be studied historically, or they can be interpreted artistically as objects that convey a specific message or idea. However, holy relics take this notion and extends it to one of an extreme one, to one of worship rather than just appreciation. While medieval Christian communities used relics as a mode of faith, that is, they extended their devotion to God through objects instead of just abstract belief. In the following slides, I'm going to explore the nature of holy Christian relics and the relic trade of Europe during the Middle Ages. As we will see throughout the presentation, these relics were born out of a cult of saints that took veneration to a whole new level. And through these interactions of cult and relic, we will observe how they were handled by different Christian communities. We will also observe the consequence of such extreme piety that would ultimately manifest itself as a mass demand for these relics, because people from all walks of life, they will scramble to own one of them. And we'll explore these roles of relics in medieval Europe through some case studies that exhibit their place in medieval society. Well, before we begin exploring the place of relics in medieval societies and their spread, we need to first define what a relic is. In its essence, a relic is any physical object that a saint used to possess. This could be anything that has an origin from the saint, and that can be traced back to the saint. And common relics include books, rosaries, crucifixes owned by these saints, or it could also be body parts from the saints, such as bones, dust, or even the whole body itself sometimes. Well, without proper context, these objects sound meaningless. So why are they so ubiquitous in the medieval Christian sphere? Well, of course, if we divorce these relics from their proper function and their context, well, they're going to have no significance. However, if we tie these objects to a well-known saint, just like what medieval Christians did, they transform into a symbol. So in essence, the relic only becomes significant if people give it a specific purpose or a role. Usually these relics are preserved well by communities in order to venerate this, the specific saint they chose. But also we see relics serve different functions throughout medieval communities. For example, churches use them as pieces of altars, so for people to pray and perform pilgrimages to. We see relics being used by soldiers in battlefields and some wars and battles as a symbol of victory, of hope, of perseverance. We see some medieval courts, royal tribunals use relics as swearing oaths, just like we do today sometimes with swearing on the Bible, for example. And of course, ordinary peasants, they turn to these relics to channel their faith to God in different ways, in a more tangible and concrete way. So relics only have meaning if people give them a proper purpose. Take an example, a gold cross that was once worn by some saint. If it was found by a non-Christian, they would find no meaning in it because they could find no message, a Christian message to take from that relic. Well, where did these relics come from anyways? Well, one notable event to consider are the early Christian persecutions that produced many martyrs. The martyrs eventually became revered as saints posthumously, but this meant that their possessions basically became relics after their deaths. People found objects that these martyrs used to own and kept them as relics to venerate and worship. We also see a lot of cases, especially in the Roman Empire, of martyria, which were buildings that were built on top of or next to burial sites of martyrs. And this meant that people could go to these buildings and either worship the body itself, or, as we will see in the future, they could just take the bodies for themselves. Well, of course, before we study why these relics had such value in these societies, we need to observe the establishment of a cult of saints in the early medieval European period. As we have established, martyrs and saints were seen as symbols of true piety. And this meant that Christians, when they hear these stories of saints, they would gain a sense of purpose and mission to spread the word of God, of course. Well, this purpose needs to be maintained. And one way to maintain this purpose is through hagiographies. These stories of saints would instill motivation in the minds of devout Christians. And we see that these stories all share the same characteristics. All the stories show that martyrs or saints showed inspiration, divinity, courage, commitment, perseverance, all that good qualities. And so one could argue that these hagiographies are not written as not only as a historical source to document the lives of saints, but instead they demonstrate to Christians the holiness and sanctity of these saints. And they could serve as didactic tools to teach morality to Christians. And why this matters is, although these hagiographies were not written by the saints themselves, nor were they ever owned by the saints, the stories within them are the stories owned by these saints. So we could see, we could perceive these hagiographies as relics themselves. They are stories owned by saints, and Christians look to them for motivation and inspiration. So all of these offer a certain perception for the medieval layperson towards saints, a perception of veneration and glorification. This perception would be consistently maintained throughout the medieval period. There would not be much variation. Most people would keep on going, worshiping these saints. And this continued positive public perception, we could see it can be observed in many cases. And one such case we will discuss a lot in this presentation are relics, but also consider more abstract ways of venerating these saints. For example, you have military orders. These Catholic orders spread the word of saints, their teachings and beliefs, and continue their legacy in a way. For example, you have the Knights Hospitallers that served St. John the Baptist, the Knights Templar, the Order of St. James, and St. Mary's Teutonic Knights. These groups embody the celebrated features of the saints that made them achieve sainthood. And in a sense, the groups acted as proxies for these saints' teachings. And this would, of course, spread continued admiration for saints throughout the medieval period and guarantee that the stories of saints would not be forgotten. We also see persistent veneration of saints through erection of churches, abbeys, monasteries, and of course, establishment of some monastic orders, such as the Order of St. Benedict. All of these are inherently a sort of cult of saint. And when I say cult, keep in mind, I don't mean a negative connotation, but a group of people that have a specific, a shared belief that they try to achieve through a common goal. And as I have mentioned before, this saintly glorification was performed through relics. centuries of early medieval ecclesiastics encouraging and pushing a cult of saints through devotion and extreme veneration meant that people had to extend their admiration to even possessions of these saints, not just the saints themselves. Veneration and faith ultimately were not enough, and people had to find a more tangible way to express their piety towards these people. This meant that various parishes, churches, bishoprics would see the establishment of permanent places for relics in their churches. These places are usually altars or the grave of a saint, and they could become sites of pilgrimages sometimes. And by the 9th century, after all of this is well and done, we see churches will start to collect and accumulate relics from all over Europe and hoard them as prized possessions. Now, why would they do that? Is the prime reason they hoarded these relics is because these relics had alleged a healing touch. They had a miraculous ability to cure and heal people. And I'll turn your attention into a specific case that demonstrates this healing touch I refer to. Now, this event is quite peculiar, and it regards an unknown saint. His bones were sent to a church in Dijon in the Carolingian Empire, and it was during the mid-9th century. The primary source I investigated is a letter sent by Archbishop of Lyon, Amalo, to a bishop under him, Theobald. This letter documents a case of supernatural oddities that happened in the church of Saint Beninius, a martyr that was venerated through building him a monastery. Well, according to Theobald, in the letter, 2 mysterious monks arrived out of the blue and brought relics of some saint from Rome to the church. The monks never revealed who the saint was because apparently they forgot his name. That's very strange. Well, soon after the bones were brought to the church, weird and inexplicable things started to occur. The women of the church were seen to be seemingly attacked by invisible forces. They would fall over and convulse on the floor. And even stranger, one of the monks that brought the relics just died out of nowhere, and the other one disappeared without a trace. Thus, we observe one of the fundamental characteristics of a relic, and it's one of supernatural power. The most important thing that distinguishes these relics from any treasure or antiquity is that they contain a miraculous or supernatural power. The power is almost always a curative one because they're attributed to saints, so they must perform something good, something saintly, something that could be venerated instead of feared. Albeit in this case of Dijon's, it was a curse rather than a curative one. This could be argued maybe the saint was angry at these people, or was angry that his remains were touched, but who knows? Indeed, the letter reveals to us that this miraculous aspect of relics was already well established at this point, and the main reason ordinary people wanted to handle them and touch them, and the main reason churches wanted to display them and keep them, is the aforementioned healing touch. In fact, we see that Amalo in his letter, refers to the curses as not, quote, not miracles of healing or curing, end quote. So this implies that the previous claim that people wanted these relics because of their useful ability of healing and curing is a true claim, or it can be argued that it's true. And moreover, Amalo continues to advise the bishop to remove the mysterious relics from the church, but also to treat it in a respectful way, which shows that although it was bringing a curse, it is still treated as a divine relic. So it should be respected because it has a saintly origin. And just to establish how important these relics were as a symbol of saintly power, we're going to look at one more piece of evidence in this letter. And when Amalo advises the bishop to remove the bones, he writes that they are, quote, not proven to be of any healthy-giving usefulness, and end quote. And he continues to celebrate and admire and basically just tell the bishop that the only relics that should be admired are the ones of the glorious martyr Benign, the martyr that this monastery was built for. And so we see that holy relics were emphasized by various churches as indications of divine power from the saints they worship themselves. That is, the saints were sending a message from heaven to these people that they are doing well, that they should be rewarded. And in other words, we can frame it this way. These people worshiping these relics are the cult. Remember the group that share a common belief and show it through extreme devotion. And this cult is being rewarded by their leader, which is the saint. They're rewarded for their continued faith. And in the 4th century, in the Roman Empire, we see another case of the importance of relics. We see it with the case of Saint Ambrose, who allegedly found a grave of martyrs, and he took these bodies to install in his church. At first, it caused big uproar. People didn't believe Ambrose that these martyrs were real. They accused them of planting the bodies. But Ambrose ultimately proved the verity, the authenticity of these martyrs by allowing a blind man to touch one of the bodies, and his sight was restored. And this anecdote shows us two things: that just like the previous case, these relics were highly valued for their healing abilities, but also we see that Ambrose's, let's say, stunt to take these bodies and install it in his church, it was one that was meant to consolidate and strengthen his ecclesiastic authority. Because, well, if your church has a relic that is capable of miraculous abilities, then you will be seen as perhaps a proxy of the saint, and you will be celebrated for your extreme authority. And with these two cases, we see a common theme. First, a mysterious relic appears from a mysterious source. And then we see that it's revealed that these relics have Roman origin. Well, in St. Ambrose's case, he found the bodies in Milan. We then see that these relics exhibit supernatural and miraculous abilities and aspects. And then we see that the lay people celebrate these relics and spread excitement and enthusiasm. Now, as more and more people start discussing the divine power of these relics and showing excitement over them, clerities were put under more pressure to acquire relics and to display them to the public. And this will cause violent explosion of excitement over these mysterious relics, because ordinary people now find a way to extend their Christian faith by glorifying these relics, a product of Christ, one could argue. Well, of course, you have consequences. This meant that some backlash was inevitable, and some other devout Christians were opposed to the idea of using the remains as saints in this as a spectacle, as pageantry. They found it offensive. Well, nevertheless, relic acquisition was still going strong at this point. And over time, they were, of course, getting rarer and harder to find because people kept hoarding them. And this meant that bishops and abbots who wanted them in their churches had to look elsewhere. They had to purchase relics illegally. Our first case wasn't perhaps, it's vague whether it's illegal or not, but St. Ambrose inherently set a precedent for this relic trade, for this lay possession of relics, when he started the practice of giving gifts of relics to some Roman aristocrats. This meant that relics could now be owned by normal lay people and the elite, which will ultimately use them for symbols of prestige and power and luxury. And since these relics were getting more valuable, some people brought it about themselves to exploit this demand and steal relics to eventually sell them to churches. These relic traders were either professional relic hunters who had big organizations, or just simple grave robbers looking to make a quick buck. In fact, we can see evidence of relic theft as early as the 4th century in the Theodosian Code. One of the laws in the Theodosian Code outlines punishments regarding the destruction of tombs, stealing relics from these tombs or treasure, and displacing the bodies found in the graves. And most importantly, the decree also asserts that no relic should be sold or trafficked. And this implies that, well, first it implies that there exists some sort of black market, if you will, for these holy relics. But also it implies that these relics were not random valuables, but were specifically sought after. And we see this because the code specifically mentions that these relics that should not be sold are those of martyrs. And this emphasizes to us how large scale the reverence of these relics became. It doesn't matter if the relic is ultimately worshipped by devout Christians or shown off by aristocrats. The fact of the matter is that they were valuable. And thus the demand for relics created a new market, and this saw the participation of not only bishops, but also kings, aristocrats, and the elite. As mentioned before, clergymen, especially elite bishops and abbots, had to find a new source of relics, and so they turned to relic traders. We don't have much time, so I will just look into 2 cases of famous relic traders. One such example of a relic trader was one by the name of Dosdona. He supplied relics to well-known men of Christ, such as Einhard and Hilduin, which were practically elite members of clergy in their sphere. These deals were shown to be done under the covers, since Dosdona's source of relics was revealed in hagiographies written by Einhard himself to be mainly illegal theft. The sources are illegal theft of tombs and grave robbing. Dosdona was able to supply a stream of bodies and many relics to Frankish clergymen mainly, and thus he created a lucrative organization. Well, for the relic hunter, this is merely a way to generate profit, while for bishops, it's a fast way to establish their parish as one with a a robust Christian faith. Moreover, it allowed bishops an opportunity to bring their communities the benefits we mentioned previously that the relics possessed. Another case is one of Felix. He was a minor relic trader, but he was able to steal the body of Saint Severus of the bishop, the monastery of Ravenna, and he tried to traded it to another monastery. And this demonstrates to us the extent of the desire of these relics by people, to the point that monasteries were taking relics from each other and claiming it as their own. And although in this case, I keep using illegal trade, it carries a negative connotation because they were illegal, of course, but relic trade was beneficial for most people involved because, well, the relic hunters that made money, of course, but also it didn't really hurt the papacy because one could see relic trade as political tools. It spreads Christianity throughout the continent, and it establishes these ecclesiastic institutions as one shrouded mystery, which people would who are intrigued by and want to explore more. And thus, we see the transformation of these relics from symbols of piety, just like we claimed earlier in the other cases, to items of luxury and prestige. So in conclusion, holy relics, they were miraculous. They were able to heal people and had supernatural aspects. They were valuable, and of course they were sanctimonious since oh, I mistyped that. They were sanctimonious since they had saintly origins, and people venerated them because of their saintly origins. And we basically saw a battle of the relics after some time has passed, and people were getting more and more interested in it. Who is going to own the highly important relics, and who's going to own the most amount of relics? And in conclusion, it's just pure chaos. And thank you guys for the wonderful opportunity to present in this conference.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mohamed. That was amazing. You totally crushed it, and I'm so glad we got to learn about that through you. So once again, we will now be entering our Q&A period. If you want to submit a question through text, submit it in the Q&A section, or raise your hand and I will ask you to speak. All right. First, we have a question from Sydney. Sydney asks, do you think the Cult of Saints helped to spread Christianity across the West? Why or why not?
Well, of course. Well, as I have talked about, these relics had these supernatural and divine powers. So when people spread the word amongst each other that, hey, these relics they're crazy, they have some magical properties, you can go there and basically heal all of your problems, then people are gonna be like, hey, Christianity sounds awesome. I should, have a look, maybe visit some monasteries, which is what led to a lot of pilgrimages during this period. And this ultimately leads to more and more Christianity spreading through people.
All right, next question. I see Scott has his hand raised. Scott, if you could just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, great talk. Thank you very much for doing that. Just a couple things. One, I just want to understand, because I was a little confused at first, but what do you mean by medieval period? What time frame are you talking about here in terms of the Cult of Saints? And have you looked into like the basis of your research? Have you looked into Peter Brown's work at all?
Well, the research of my time period focused mostly around the early medieval period. Most of these cases of relic thefts and worshipping of relics were either during the Roman period, so around 4th century, and during the Carolingian Renaissance during the 9th century, which is when Christianity saw more spread and yeah. Well, I haven't really came across Peter Brown's work, but I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I would highly suggest it because he was fairly influential in terms of doing research on the development of the cult of saints. So just something to help you out with your research on that. And yeah, I was just kind of curious about the time period because where you're talking about Roman and early medieval and then medieval, I was a little more confused about the time period. But that's all I wanted to know was just a clarification there on how that was developing. So I understood your timeline there. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, I see Kelly has her hand raised, so I'll just pass it over to her. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the talk. I think I have maybe more of a comment than a question, but I find it so fascinating when you spoke about earlier in your presentation how these relics are significant in the context. I think you gave the example that if someone came along and saw someone wearing a cross, that it wouldn't necessarily mean anything until it's placed in the context of Christianity and there's some significance associated with it. But what I find really fascinating is that with the relic hunters, that even if people stealing and selling relics didn't find them personally religiously significant, the context which surrounded them in terms of the status and the prestige was enough to make them meaningful. And I just find that really fascinating how there's kind of that interplay between a relic being within a religious tradition, important because of the ideas around it, but even outside that, it still holds a certain amount of status. So anyways, I just thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, well, your comment makes a lot of sense because we see originally these relics were mostly venerated by, religious people, so bishops and devout Christians who attend these monasteries. But when these stories spread, they become more and more important. And even outside of their context of religion, people realize that, hey, these relics have important values, so why not trade them and maybe own one just in case I need to make money in the future, or perhaps to show off to people that I own a relic that has supernatural properties. And yeah, I think it's really interesting how this evolution happens.
All right, I have a question from you from Cassie. So this is from hers. Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. I was wondering if relic veneration was performed more by women or men?
Ooh, good question. Well, the sources don't really give any indication of whether these people were men or women, but I'd say it's about the same if you think about it. Men that go to monasteries would usually bring or maybe their wives would join alongside them. And of course, during this period, women had to appeal to an idea of sanctity and modesty. So they were encouraged to go to churches, and over time, of course, they would develop a devotion to Christianity. So they would venerate these relics as well. So I'd say it's almost both of them are the same.
Great. I have a question for you from Carolyn. So the question is, so interesting, Mohamed. Is there any indication that relic hunters were punished, or was it understood as honor among thieves as it seemed to be a holy industry?
That's a very good question. Well, I wasn't able to cover it during the lecture during the talk because of time constraints, but during my research, I've seen a lot of sources of a lot of kingdoms and empires passing laws that attack these relic hunters. And there are some cases of these relic hunters being apprehended and their relics being seized, and they don't go much into what they do with these relic hunters, but you can assume not the worst.
All right, and we're going to end that there. I just have one last question, and this is from Lisa. So Lisa, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Great, thanks so much. It's not so much a question. If this is the last chance to speak up, I just wanted to extend a huge thanks to all three presenters today. It was wonderful to learn a little bit more about you personally, and especially your research and bringing some order to chaos in all three topics. So it's a big deal to put yourself out there and present your work. And I just wanted to say all three of you did a wonderful job and should be congratulated. Thank you.
All right, I have one last minute question that came in, and then we're going to end it there. So this is from Marika. Marika says, Mohamed, thank you so much. Have you looked at the travels of Nun Egeria? She talks a lot about relics and saints throughout the Middle East in the 4th century. Really great stuff.
I haven't, to be honest. Well, most of my research focused on Western Christianity and Roman Catholicism. But yeah, I'd love to look into that. It sounds interesting because although Eastern Christianity might have different traditions, they share a lot of things together. But thanks for the suggestion, though.
All right, and that concludes our panel for today. I want to thank everyone so much for coming out to our first undergraduate panel, and I'd of course love to thank our 3 panelists who absolutely killed it today. For some of you, I know this was your first conference, and that's totally nerve-wracking, but you all crushed it, and I'm really looking forward to reading more on your research. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon, everyone.